Social media was meant to connect us, but in these chilling cases, it became something far more dangerous. A place where fantasy blurred with reality and boundaries dissolved behind screens. What started as friendship, flirtation, or curiosity spiraled into manipulation, obsession, and ultimately, murder. In these stories, likes became leverage, DMS became weapons. Posts were twisted into power plays, and pretend personas pulled real people into deadly traps. Sometimes the danger came from a stranger pretending to be someone they weren't. Other times, it came from someone who had been watching all along, grooming, controlling, and waiting. From catfishing schemes and jealousy-fueled betrayals to full-blown digital delusions, these are the true stories of how social media didn't just document violence, it helped create it. A reminder that behind every profile is a person, but not everyone online is who they claim to be. And sometimes, the darkest things don't hide in the shadows. They're posted in plain sight. Janelle Potter. A young couple found shot execution style, the woman with her arms still wrapped around their crying baby. It looked like a horror story, ripped from fiction. But what investigators uncovered was even more disturbing. A twisted web of fake CIA agents, online threats, and a daughter who manipulated her own parents into committing cold-blooded murder. It started like any ordinary morning. On a cold January day in 2012, a family friend dropped by, a modest home in Mountain City, Tennessee, just to check in. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. But when he stepped through the door, the quiet stillness felt wrong. What he found inside would shake the small Appalachian town to its core. Billy Payne lay in bed, shot in the head, his throat slashed. In another room, his fiancée, Billie Jean Hayworth, had been killed execution style, gunned down with a single shot while holding their baby boy. 7-month-old Tyler was found still in her arms, crying, covered in blood but miraculously unharmed. The scene was brutal, intimate, personal. For many it felt like a senseless slaughter. But as detectives began to piece together the evidence, they realized this wasn't a random break-in or a robbery gone wrong. It was something darker, something far more calculated. What emerged was a tangled conspiracy, driven not by drugs or money, but by Facebook messages, jealousy, and a fabricated fantasy world designed to isolate and manipulate. At the center of it all was 30-year-old Janelle Potter, a woman with deep insecurities, a fragile sense of reality, and an alarming ability to spin fiction into fact. She lived with her parents, spent most of her time online, and believed that Billie Jean and Billy Payne were bullying her on social media. She complained constantly, insisting she was being harassed, threatened, targeted, and her parents believed her. Especially her mother, Barbara, and her father, Marvin, a former Marine trained in intelligence. When fake emails from supposed CIA agents began appearing warning of threats to Janelle's safety, Marvin and Barbara were convinced they had to act. What they didn't know or refused to see was that those emails were written by Janelle herself. This wasn't just a murder. It was the result of one woman's obsession with control, her paranoia amplified by social media, and a family's dangerous devotion to protecting her. The Potters thought they were eliminating a threat, but all they destroyed was a young couple, their future, and their own lives. All because of Janelle Potter. Janelle Potter was 24 years old at the time of the murders. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and a series of other physical ailments, she lived under the constant care and scrutiny of her parents, Marvin Buddy Potter and Barbara Potter. To many, It seemed like they had built a fortress around her. The family had relocated from Pennsylvania to the quiet town of Mountain City, Tennessee in 2005, hoping a slower pace and tight-knit community might offer Janelle some peace. But Janelle didn't find peace. She found isolation. She didn't drive. She didn't work. She struggled to make friends, and her parents, particularly her father, a former Marine with strong, sometimes rigid beliefs about honor and protection, only deepened that divide. Buddy Potter was overbearing, even paranoid when it came to Janelle's safety. To outsiders, Janelle was just a shy, awkward young woman with health problems and limited independence. But behind the closed doors of the Potter household, and behind a glowing screen, she became something else entirely. Online, social media, especially Facebook, became her world. It gave her access to friendships and romantic attention she couldn't find in person. It also gave her a way to shape the narrative, deciding who was good, who was bad, and who she believed was out to hurt her. At first, it all seemed harmless. Janelle connected with Tracy Greenwell, a local pharmacy tech, and through her, met Tracy's cousin, Billy Payne. Through that circle, she also came to know Billie Jean Hayworth, Billy's girlfriend, and later, the mother of his child. For a moment, things looked up. Janelle had a new social circle. She was laughing, messaging, even spending time with them in person. But that changed quickly. Behind the smiles and status updates, something was festering. Janelle developed romantic feelings for Billy Payne, something those close to her described as more of an infatuation. Billy, for his part, made it clear that he was happily with Billie Jean, but Janelle couldn't let it go. She began to interpret everyday slights as targeted attacks. Innocent online posts became coded threats. She grew increasingly convinced that Billie Jean and her friends were bullying her by mocking her appearance, spreading rumors, and planning to harm her. There was no evidence of this. Not in Facebook logs, not in messages, not in witness statements. But Janelle believed it with religious intensity. And when Billy and Billie Jean finally unfriended her on Facebook, it wasn't just social rejection. It was, in her mind, a declaration of war. That single click, unfriend, set off a chain reaction. Soon, Janelle was telling her parents that she feared for her life. She showed them anonymous online messages and alleged threats, messages that investigators would later determine she had written herself. But to Buddy and Barbara, it was all real. Their daughter was under attack, and someone had to protect her. And then came Chris. Chris wasn't a neighbor or a family friend. He wasn't someone they could call on the phone. He was something stranger, however. He was a supposed CIA operative who had taken a special interest in Janelle's safety. Through email, Chris warned the Potters that a group of dangerous locals, chief among them, Billy Payne and Billie Jean Hayworth, were threatening to rape and kill Janelle. He said they were part of a broader conspiracy, that they needed to be stopped. The Potters believed it, every word. But Chris didn't exist. Investigators later discovered that the emails had been sent from the Potter household's own IP address. Chris was Janelle. She had invented him, written to her parents under the guise of national security, and created an elaborate world where murder could be justified as self-defense. She didn't do it alone. Her boyfriend, Jamie Curd, played a quiet but crucial role. Jamie was a 30-year-old family friend who had secretly been dating Janelle, which was something that she kept hidden from her parents. He often visited the house under the guise of fixing the family computer. Like the Potters, Jamie believed Janelle was in danger. He believed Chris was real, and he believed that something had to be done. On the morning of January 31st, 2012, A friend of Billy and Billie Jean arrived at their home to check in. What he found would haunt him forever. He called 911 in a panic, telling the dispatcher there were 2 bodies and a baby crying. Billy Payne had been shot in the face while sleeping, his throat viciously slashed, a shocking act of rage and overkill. In another room, Billie Jean Hayworth was found dead from a single gunshot wound, still holding her infant son, Tyler. The baby was crying, his tiny face streaked with the blood of both parents. For 7 days, jurors listened as prosecutors laid out the digital breadcrumbs. They saw the emails, the Facebook posts, the shredded documents pieced back together with painstaking care. They heard about Janelle's fabricated CIA operative, the manipulation of her family, and the lengths she went to in maintaining the illusion of victimhood. Testimony revealed just how completely Janelle had ensnared her parents and Jamie into believing that violence was the only way to save her. There was no murder weapon found in Janelle's hands, no eyewitness who saw her pull a trigger, but the evidence painted a devastating picture. She had orchestrated it all. On July 30th, 2015, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty. Both women were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Janelle's projected release date was listed as March 8th, 2069, when she would be 79 years old. Barbara, who was initially sentenced to 2 life terms, had her conviction overturned in 2021 due to a legal conflict. Her attorney had previously represented her husband, Buddy, but in a new legal deal, she pleaded guilty to facilitation of murder. Her new sentence allowed for the possibility of parole in 2028. Even after conviction, Janelle maintained her innocence. In a 2015 interview with ABC's 2020, she said, "I didn't hate them. I just disliked them. I just wanted the harassment to stop." She denied fabricating the emails, denied involvement, denied responsibility, but the paper trail told a different story. Baby Tyler, just 7 months old when he was found covered in his parents' blood, was placed with relatives. His name was changed. His location kept secret. Law enforcement and family members did everything they could to give him a life far away from the horrors of Mountain City. As far as anyone knows, he has grown up with little knowledge of the brutal events that orphaned him. But for those who investigated the case, the trauma never left. The little boy, just thinking about him laying there just breaks my heart. Chief Deputy Joe Woodard. The emotional weight of that moment of finding a baby still alive, cradled in his mother's lifeless arms, is something no officer on the scene has forgotten. What makes the Potter case so haunting isn't just the brutality of the crime. It's how it unfolded. Not with violence posted on social media, but with violence plotted through it. Janelle Potter didn't seek fame. She wasn't trying to go viral. She didn't live stream the crime or dance for views. Instead, she used social media to manipulate perception and to create an invisible enemy, then rally her loved ones to destroy it. It was digital coercion at its darkest. And it worked. The tools were simple: Facebook messages, printouts, a Gmail CM. But the consequences were deadly. She used the same platforms that most people use to stay in touch or share their lives to carry out a slow, calculated psychological operation on her own family. Social media allowed Janelle Potter to be someone she wasn't, TBI agent Scott Lott said, and that someone orchestrated a double murder. Today, Janelle Potter is incarcerated at the Deborah Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Barbara Potter is housed in the same facility, awaiting her next parole review. Marvin "Buddy" Potter remains behind bars at the Turney Center Industrial Complex in Hickman County, serving 2 life sentences for pulling the trigger. Jamie Curd is still serving his 25-year sentence. His earliest possible release is years away. Mountain City, forever marked by what happened in 2012, continues to mourn. Not just the deaths of two young parents, but the reminder that sometimes the people who commit the worst acts don't look like monsters. They look like neighbors, like parents, like daughters. Sarah Grace Patrick. 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick wasn't just watching true crime unfold online. She allegedly created her own. The fascination that once kept her up late scrolling TikTok had seeped off the screen and into her life. By the time police arrived at the blood-soaked scene, Sarah had already turned her obsession with manipulation, influence, and notoriety into a horrifying reality. She didn't just consume the genre, she embodied it. February 20th, 2024 was a quiet Tuesday in Carrollton, Georgia. Or at least it was supposed to be. The town, nestled in the rolling hills west of Atlanta, was known for its southern charm and peaceful pace of life. But by the following morning, that peace would be shattered. The news would break of a gruesome double homicide, a crime so shocking and brutal that it seemed almost scripted for a true crime podcast. Within hours, whispers turned into headlines. A local family was torn apart, and at the center of it all was a 17-year-old girl hiding in plain sight. That girl was Sarah Grace Patrick. She lived on Tyus Road in a modest beige home with white trim and a porch swing that creaked in the Georgia breeze. It was the kind of house you'd pass without noticing. Inside lived her mother, 41-year-old Kristen Brock, her stepfather, 45-year-old James Brock, and her 5-year-old little sister, who brought laughter to the house even on long, quiet days. To neighbors, the Patricks were a typical blended family. Kristen worked hard to provide for her daughters, and James, known as a quiet but hard-working man, seemed to care deeply for both girls. Sarah Grace was enrolled in school, active on social media, and known for her striking looks and sometimes intense personality. She was the kind of teen who posted selfies with brooding captions one day and peppy dance videos the next. Nothing about her life, at least online, seemed out of place. But behind that digital facade was something much darker. Sarah had a growing obsession with attention. Over time, her online presence had evolved from harmless trends to something more calculated. She began posting cryptic messages, talking about feeling misunderstood, isolated, and angry. Her followers, many who were strangers, offered encouragement, validation, and sometimes a dangerous level of engagement. Then came the true crime fixation. Sarah reportedly followed high-profile murder cases with fervor, dissecting motives, idolizing certain killers, and mimicking their mannerisms. She devoured documentaries, podcast episodes, and viral TikToks about infamous crimes. Some she rewatched over and over. According to acquaintances, she didn't just learn about the cases, she absorbed them. She began talking as if she were a character in one, imagining herself as the misunderstood protagonist of her own twisted story. And in her private messages, that narrative grew darker still. Sarah began venting about her stepfather. Friends would later say she claimed James was abusive, a claim police would investigate but never confirm. She also began portraying her mother, Kristen, as controlling and overbearing. In Sarah's online world, she painted herself as trapped, victimized, pushed too far. But in real life, Kristen and James were reportedly doing everything they could to help Sarah succeed. They set rules, such as curfews and screen time limits, that Sarah didn't like. They questioned her relationships and her choices online, and eventually, those conflicts boiled over. Whatever happened inside that house on February 20th, 2024, would end in blood, When police were called to the residence, the scene inside was nightmarish. Kristen Brock and James Brock had both been stabbed multiple times in what investigators described as a crime of staggering violence. Their bodies were discovered in different parts of the home, with signs of a struggle indicating that they may have tried to fight back. Sarah's 5-year-old sister was physically unharmed, but traumatized. In the hours that followed, Sarah Grace Patrick would go from victim to suspect. The teen, who had fled the scene and initially portrayed herself as an innocent survivor, quickly became the focus of the investigation. Her story unraveled almost as fast as it had been spun. The media swarmed. Was this a case of self-defense, abuse, or something more sinister? The truth, it turned out, was stranger than fiction and far more disturbing. But what unfolded in that modest Georgia home would catapult Sarah Grace Patrick from grieving daughter to prime suspect, not just in the eyes of law enforcement, but in the eyes of an entire online community that had followed the case with growing curiosity and then disbelief. What began as a local tragedy turned into a nationwide spectacle, with TikTok sleuths, YouTube commentators, and Reddit threads dissecting every detail. And in a dark twist of irony, the person who allegedly lit the fuse on that online attention was Sarah Grace herself. The first 911 call came from inside the house. It was Sarah Grace on the line, her voice trembling with what sounded like shock and terror. She told the dispatcher that she had found her parents, Kristen and James Brock, lying motionless in their bedroom. According to her version of events, her 5-year-old sister had wandered into the room first and had seen everything. Sarah, she claimed, had followed seconds later, only to stumble into a nightmare. Both adults were dead from apparent gunshot wounds. Blood stained the floors, the walls, the bedding. But no gun was found. Police arrived quickly. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no kicked-in doors. Nothing to indicate a break-in. And nothing, at first glance, to explain the sheer violence of what had occurred. The Brocks had been killed execution style. Investigators immediately ruled it a double homicide. But the more time they spent in that house, the more questions they had. Where was the weapon? Why were there no defensive wounds on either victim? Why had Sarah Grace, by her own admission, not heard anything, such as gunshots or screaming, until her sister found the bodies? And why, most chilling of all, had the family dog not barked? There were no easy answers, but there was one glaring truth. This was a murder that had taken place in a house with 2 young girls, one too little to even understand what death meant, and the other now sitting under a microscope. For weeks, investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed friends, teachers, and classmates. They searched for DNA, for digital evidence, for something, anything that could explain what had happened in the Brock home that night. But the case stalled. There were no arrests, no public suspects. In the absence of answers, speculation took root. That speculation eventually spilled online, and that's when things got even stranger. In June, nearly 4 months after the murders, TikTok creator Janice, known for her account allegedly reportedly, opened her DMs to find a message that stopped her cold. Search up Brock case. They're my parents. And out of nowhere, a random Thursday night in February, someone came in my house with me and my 5-year-old sister and shot my parents, brutally leaving them for me and my little sister to wake up to. The message came from a user named Sarah Grace. At first, Janice didn't think much of it. She frequently received tips and messages from people asking her to highlight little-known cases. But this one was different. It wasn't just a plea, it was personal. The sender wasn't an outside observer. She claimed to be the victim's daughter. There was something else that stuck with Janice. The tone. It felt emotional, but also oddly composed, almost curated. As she began looking into it, she realized she wasn't alone. Other creators soon came forward with similar accounts. True crime influencer Mama Tot shared a screenshot of a message she'd received in April, 3 months before the arrest. It read, "Mama Tot, I need a mama bad. Right now, I'm going through it." At the time, she chalked it up to a troubled teen reaching out. But in hindsight, it felt more like an audition for empathy. Another creator, known as True Crime Mama, said someone claiming to be Sarah Grace, or someone speaking on her behalf, reached out with probing questions. Have you heard about the Brock murders? Do you think police will solve it? Why do you think no one's been arrested? It was as if someone wanted to control the narrative, not just to keep the story alive, but also to shape it. Janice, speaking to reporters later, said she got the unsettling sense that Sarah Grace wasn't just grieving. She was digitally reliving the crime. With each message, each post, each carefully phrased comment, it was as if she was playing a part, spinning a version of events that cast her in a specific role. The brave survivor, the older sister trying to stay strong, the forgotten victim in a true crime story that wasn't moving fast enough for her liking. Then, everything changed. On July 8, 2024, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Sarah Grace Patrick. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She turned herself in. The charges were staggering: 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. Despite being only 17 at the time of the killings, she would be tried as an adult. Carrollton was stunned. No one wanted to believe that the soft-spoken girl who had shown up at school, looking tired and pale, the girl who posted about her little sister's bravery and her own broken heart, could be capable of such a thing. And yet, the investigators were adamant. They said they had mountains of evidence. They didn't release what that evidence was, but the TikTok community, the very one Sarah had courted, was already sifting through the trail she left behind. Old posts, deleted accounts, screenshots, DMS. It wasn't just the public who had followed her story. Sarah Grace had allegedly built the road they were now traveling, brick by digital brick. Some say she wanted attention. Others think she wanted sympathy. But what's most disturbing is the idea that Sarah may have wanted both and was willing to kill for it. In the digital age, it's no longer just what we say. It's how we frame it, how we curate it, how we control the lens through which others see us. And if prosecutors are right, that lens became a weapon, one that not only distorted the truth, but ultimately destroyed it. According to Ashley Halsey, a spokesperson for the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, the digital trail Sarah Grace left behind could be the key to the entire case. Her social media activity, including likes, comments, private messages, and even deleted posts, is now being combed through with forensic precision. Every DM is a breadcrumb. Every post, a potential clue. Authorities are scrutinizing her online behavior from the months leading up to the murders and the weeks that followed. They're not just looking at what she said, but when she said it and who she said it to. Timestamps, metadata, and deleted messages recovered from cloud backups have become the digital fingerprints investigators are relying on in the absence of physical evidence. Because while the murder weapon has never been recovered, the prosecution is building what they believe to be a powerful, circumstantial case. It's not just about motive anymore. It's about digital intent. And still, questions remain. Could Sarah Grace have pulled this off alone? Some investigators quietly suggest she may have had help, either in planning or in the aftermath. Others argue that the case feels thin, driven more by suspicion and social media speculation than hard evidence. Without the weapon, they say, it's hard to move from theory to proof. But what everyone can agree on is this: Sarah Grace Patrick is no longer the grieving daughter who captured the internet's sympathy. She is now the defendant in a case that's attracting national attention. After her arrest, Sarah Grace's grandfather, Dennis Nolan, was one of the first family members to speak publicly. He didn't offer platitudes, he offered questions. "It's all speculative stuff," Nolan told reporters. "Nothing puts the gun in her hand. They don't have the gun. They don't have proof." He recalled the moment Sarah called him from jail. She was hysterical, he said, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. She kept asking, "Why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything." To Nolan, his granddaughter was a smart, creative teenager who struggled under the strict household rules imposed by Kristen and James Brock. Sarah had reportedly asked to live with her biological father instead. Nolan described the request as a cry for independence. Her biological dad, he said, was more lenient, but Kristen and James, for all their rules, had given her structure, safety, and a stable home. "She was better off with Kristen and James," he admitted quietly. "But unless something has changed, we still live in a country where you're innocent until proven guilty." In Carrollton, that's a sentiment people are trying to hold on to, but whispers persist. The Brock's funeral was held on March 8th at Catalyst Church, where the couple had been active members. The service was packed. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors all came to pay their respects. They spoke of James's quiet strength, Kristen's warm heart, and the way they both loved their girls. But underneath the hymns and shared memories, there was tension, an unspoken chill, because everyone knew this wasn't a murder by a stranger. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen, no footprints, no broken locks, no shattered glass. Whoever did this had walked in easily, comfortably, as if they belonged. And that meant one thing: it was someone they knew, someone trusted. The Brock's youngest daughter, just 5 years old, survived the night. But investigators called her the saddest victim of all. A child who will grow up knowing that the worst night of her life may have involved her own sister. A child who will carry the trauma of what she saw or heard for the rest of her life. The rise of true crime content on TikTok has turned everyday people into viral detectives. Some have uncovered clues police missed. Others have sensationalized tragedies for clicks. But the Sarah Grace Patrick case has added a new layer to the conversation. What happens when the person behind the crime becomes part of the audience? Was Sarah Grace a traumatized teen trying to process an unthinkable loss through online confessionals? Or was she manipulating the narrative, crafting her own legend before anyone else could write it for her? When she allegedly messaged a true crime creator, calling the Brock case a really big hit, it sounded like a plea for coverage. But in hindsight, it read like something darker, a teaser trailer. As of now, Sarah Grace remains behind bars. A judge denied her bail, citing the seriousness of the charges and the potential risk of flight. It's unclear whether she has retained legal counsel or if her family is pursuing a public defender. Prosecutors have not yet said whether they will seek a plea deal or take the case to trial. Meanwhile, the investigation continues. Authorities are still combing through every digital thread, including Patrick's browser history, phone pings, cloud-stored images, text chains, and deleted TikToks. It's a digital forensic puzzle, and law enforcement insists that more pieces may still surface. They haven't ruled out additional arrests. They haven't ruled out an accomplice. But they also haven't explained how a teenager could commit such a crime without leaving behind more physical evidence. For the town of Carrollton, the question lingers. Did Sarah Grace Patrick, this quiet, artistic girl who once called her stepfather Daddy, really plan and carry out the brutal murders of the people who raised her? Or has the internet once again turned a vulnerable teen into a convenient villain? We don't have those answers yet, and until the case goes to trial, we may never fully know the truth. But in an age where tragedy plays out in real time, and justice is often debated in comment sections before it's argued in court, the line between grieving daughter and digital performer remains heartbreakingly blurred. Brandon Clark, a teenage girl found dead by the side of a car, with her throat slashed and her body posted online like a trophy. What police uncovered next was a grim story of obsession, manipulation, and a digital age that blurred the lines between love, control, and performance. On the morning of July 14th, 2019, a series of chilling images began circulating online. In one of them, a young woman appeared lifeless, blood pooling beneath her. The photo was tagged with her social media handle. Moments later, 911 dispatchers in Utica, New York, received a call from a man who had made alarming threats against himself and others. When officers arrived on the scene, they didn't find a suicide. They found a crime scene soaked in blood, heartbreak, and digital distortion. 17-year-old Bianca Deans lay dead beside an SUV. Her killer, 21-year-old Brandon Clark, was seated next to her, covered in blood, holding a knife, and live-streaming the aftermath. As police closed in, he began stabbing himself in the neck, muttering apologies and suicide threats, documenting the entire spectacle like a final act in a play only he could direct. But Bianca Deans wasn't just a footnote in a viral horror story. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a recent high school graduate who struggled with depression and anxiety. Bianca had been open about her mental health battles. Online, she found solace in Discord servers and Instagram posts, sharing her art, selfies, and thoughts about life and survival. She wasn't famous, but she was known in Neek's online circles, especially among communities focused on anime, gaming, and alternative culture. Bianca's family described her as creative, compassionate, and fiercely intelligent. She had dreams of studying psychology and helping others with mental illness, something she understood from personal experience. Her stepmother later told reporters that Bianca had finally started seeing light at the end of the tunnel. She had graduated high school, was planning for college, and had recently returned from a trip with friends. Things were looking up. She met Brandon Clark online. Clark wasn't a stranger in the traditional sense. He was part of the same online world as Bianca. Chat rooms, mutual follows, shared memes and conversations. They had met a few months earlier on Instagram and eventually began seeing each other in person. But according to Bianca's family and close friends, their relationship was never romantic. It never was anything like the way Clark portrayed it in his head. He saw himself as her boyfriend. She saw him as a friend. Maybe something more. But it wasn't exclusive. And it certainly wasn't love. What it was, according to prosecutors, was a one-sided obsession disguised as affection. On the night of July 13th, Bianca and Clark attended a concert together in New York City. They took selfies, smiled for the camera. At first glance, it looked like a fun night out. But things soured quickly. Bianca had allegedly met up with another guy at the show that Clark didn't know, someone he perceived as a threat. Witnesses said Clark grew agitated, possessive. He accused Bianca of using him, humiliating him. They argued on the drive home. According to investigators, Clark waited until they reached a secluded area. That's when he attacked her, slashing her throat with a knife he had brought with him. Then, as if to immortalize his act, he took out his phone. He snapped photos of Bianca's body. He posted them on Discord. He tagged her social accounts. He left chilling captions. One message read, "I'm sorry, Bianca." Another, "Here comes hell." It's redemption, right? By the time police reached the scene, Clark had already turned the camera on himself. His neck was bleeding, his phone still recording. His final message, captured live, wasn't a confession. Instead, it was a broadcast. Bianca Deans' murder wasn't just brutal. It was public, digital, viral, and that's what made it so haunting. Because this wasn't a case of a secret killer or a crime discovered in the quiet. This was a performance of violence that was calculated, documented, and delivered directly to a digital audience. The internet, which had once offered Bianca community and comfort, became the stage for her murder. And for her family, the trauma didn't end when police took Clark into custody. It began again and again. Each time another photo was reposted, shared, commented on. Bianca's mother would later describe receiving messages from strangers with images of her daughter's final moments. Trolls tagged her. Accounts made jokes. Others claimed Bianca deserved it. She became, in death, a meme, which was something her family fought desperately to stop. But behind the headlines and hashtags was the truth. Bianca was a teenager, a girl trying to find herself in the blur of adolescence, mental illness, and modern technology. She wasn't perfect, but she was loved, and she was trying. Her life mattered. And that's what makes this story more than just a viral tragedy. It's a story about how far obsession can go when amplified by the internet. A story about control disguised as affection. About the dangerous myth that rejection is a justification for violence. And about the need for justice, not just in court, but online. Because Bianca Deans deserved better. In life, in death, in memory. To those who followed her online, Bianca was an enigma. She was a Tumblr girl, an e-girl, a sad aesthetic, wrapped in eyeliner and vulnerability. Her selfies hinted at stories too heavy for her age. Depression, abuse, trauma, and a constant search for identity. She wrote about feeling lost, broken, sometimes invisible. But she also wrote about survival. Offline, her life was quieter, but no less complex. She had just graduated from high school. She was preparing to attend community college. She was close to her mother and little sister. She struggled with borderline personality disorder, but had been working hard to build a stable future. She was finally beginning to feel free. Then Brandon Clark stepped in. Brandon Clark wasn't just a friend. At 21, he was 4 years older than Bianca, but he positioned himself as someone who understood her. He first met Bianca through Discord, a place where communities form around games, music, and online identity. Like many young people, Bianca often felt safer online than in the real world. Clark seemed harmless at first. Clean-cut, mild-mannered, a guy who posted selfies at the gym and quoted self-help mantras. He offered to drive her places. He brought her coffee. He spent time with her family. To outsiders, he looked like a big brother figure, a chaperone, someone keeping Bianca grounded. But behind the scenes, Brandon was crafting a different narrative, one where he was the boyfriend and Bianca was his. He documented their time together with obsessive detail. He kept photos, texts, and private screenshots. On his Instagram, he shared filtered images and cryptic captions that made it seem like they were in a relationship. They weren't. Bianca never saw him that way. Her mother, Kim Devins, later said her daughter had been clear about the boundaries. They were just friends. She appreciated Brandon's attention, maybe even enjoyed the sense of security that came from having someone to confide in, but it was never romantic. Brandon didn't listen. He wasn't hearing her words. He was hearing a fantasy in his head. And when Bianca began talking to someone new, Clark snapped. On July 13th, 2019, Bianca agreed to attend a concert with Brandon in New York City. She had been looking forward to seeing Nicole Dollanganger, a dreamy, melancholic singer whose lyrics touched on themes of loneliness, heartbreak, and complicated intimacy. Brandon offered to drive. It wasn't unusual, since they had been to shows together before. Bianca, still trusting, still believing she could set the terms of their friendship, got in the car. They made the drive downstate, music playing, the city lights ahead. At the venue, Bianca met up with a boy she had recently started seeing. The two talked, smiled, took selfies. Brandon watched from the sidelines, eyes locked on Bianca, like a director watching an actor break from the script. Something inside him shifted that night. To outside observers, it looked like a typical teenage night out. But for Brandon, it was the moment he lost control. He saw Bianca smiling at someone else, not at him. And for a man like Brandon Clark, whose self-worth was tied to being needed, adored, obeyed, that smile wasn't just rejection. It was betrayal. In his mind, Bianca had humiliated him. And in that moment, Brandon made a decision. One that he would rehearse, refine, and stage with cold calculation. If he couldn't have her, no one could. They were supposed to go home. After the concert, the two got back in the car and started the long drive back to Utica. It was after midnight. The highway stretched out before them and seemed quiet, empty, and unsettling in its stillness. Bianca was likely tired. She dozed off in the passenger seat, unaware that the boy she thought was her friend was already imagining how he'd end the night. At some point, Brandon exited the highway. He didn't say much. Maybe he told her he needed to stop and talk. Maybe he said nothing at all. He pulled onto a dead-end street in a quiet neighborhood, not far from Bianca's home. Trees lined the road. No one was around. Bianca woke up. There may have been an argument filled with heated words, confusion, and fear. Brandon told her she had hurt him, that she had used him. He wanted to talk, to make her understand. But this wasn't about understanding. It wasn't about pain. It was about punishment. Brandon pulled out a knife. He slashed her throat, and he filmed it. In the twisted logic of abusive men, he believed this was an act of love, a final, tragic gesture. In reality, it was about domination, about silencing her, about forcing her to be his, even in death, but it didn't end there. Brandon Clark wanted an audience. He posed Bianca's lifeless body next to the car like a grotesque tableau. Blood stained the grass. Her face was eerily peaceful, framed by the morning light. Brandon took photos that were deliberately framed and curated. Then he uploaded them to Discord, Snapchat, and Instagram. The captions were cryptic, theatrical, pseudo-poetic nonsense masking an act of horror. He tagged Bianca's account so her friends would see. He knew what he was doing. It worked. The internet exploded. Bianca's friends started calling her phone, messaging her Instagram. When she didn't answer, they reached out to her mom. Someone had posted a photo of Bianca's face, pale, bloody, lifeless. Kim Devins knew in her gut. Her daughter was gone. By the time police arrived, Brandon was still on the scene. He had set up his phone and started live streaming his suicide attempt. He stabbed himself in the neck repeatedly, trying to complete what he saw as a twisted final act. He had music playing. He had typed out a farewell. It was theater, and he wanted the world to watch. Bianca was still there, her voice silenced, her image shared like a trophy. It wasn't just a murder. It was a broadcast. Brandon Clark didn't run. He didn't try to cover his tracks or hide what he'd done. Instead, he made sure people saw it, like really saw it. Bianca's death became part of the same digital world where she had once felt safest. The same online communities where she found friendship and support were now the vehicles for her dehumanization. The images spread fast. Discord servers, Instagram DMs, Reddit, Twitter, even Facebook groups. Some people were horrified. Others reshared them like collectibles, like clickbait for true crime voyeurs, or worse, a sick joke. Bianca's image, so carefully curated in life, was now being reduced to a symbol of shock and grief, circulated against her will. And her family was the target. Her mother received the photos and messages. Her sister was tagged. Trolls mocked them, asking how it felt to raise a girl who deserved it. It wasn't just grief, it was a second wave of violence, a trauma with no boundary, because every scroll through the internet could reopen the wound. Kim Devins did something few could imagine. She decided to fight back. She began speaking out, giving interviews, writing op-eds. She demanded answers from the platforms that let Bianca's death go viral and called for laws to give families more power over graphic content. The media had latched onto the headline, Instagram murder. But Kim reminded the world, Bianca was a real person, not an aesthetic, not a cautionary tale, not a body. She was 17. She was her daughter. Brandon Clark survived. His self-inflicted wounds weren't fatal. Police stopped him before he could complete his dramatic final act. And after a short hospital stay, he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. For months, he maintained a not guilty plea. Then, in February 2020, he changed it to guilty. He told the court he wanted to spare Bianca's family the pain of a trial. But even in that statement, there was control. He wanted credit for doing the right thing. Even in court, he was trying to narrate his own story. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. The courtroom was full of people who loved Bianca, such as family, friends, classmates. People who had known her as a daughter, a sister, an artist. Not as a hashtag, not as a meme, not as a digital trophy. And they wanted people to remember her as she really was. Bianca Devins wasn't famous. She wasn't a celebrity. She was a teenage girl trying to grow up in a digital world that made it almost impossible to do so safely. She was kind, funny, smart. She loved music and photography. She wanted to study psychology. She struggled with mental illness but kept going. She made art from her pain. Not for attention, but for connection. And that is what was stolen. After Bianca's death, social media companies were slow to act. Her murder photo remained online for days, weeks, or even months in some corners. Despite countless reports, platforms cited content review delays or failure to meet graphic violence thresholds. That became part of Kim Devins's new mission. She didn't just want justice for Bianca, she wanted change. In 2023, Bianca's law was introduced in Congress. It would require social media platforms with more than a certain number of users to implement systems for reporting and removing violent content quickly. It also emphasized the rights of families to control what happened to their loved one's image after death. It was one small step toward reclaiming dignity in the digital age. What happened to Bianca wasn't about one man. It was about a culture that still treats girls as possessions. That tells them their lives are only valuable when they're beautiful, quiet, and compliant, and expendable when they aren't. Brandon Clark didn't kill Bianca because she was cruel. He killed her because she said no, because she moved on, because he couldn't control her. That doesn't make him a heartbroken suitor. It makes him a killer. And the internet, it helped him finish the job, not just by spreading the images, but by giving him a place to build the fantasy. A place where obsession could masquerade as love, where stalking was overlooked, where teenage girls are still called teases or attention seekers when they assert boundaries. Janelle Potter, Sarah Grace Patrick, Brandon Clark. 3 names, 3 lives, 3 very different stories which are linked not by location or motive, but by the eerie, ever-present shadow of social media. In Mountain City, Tennessee, Janelle spun an imaginary web of CIA agents and online harassment to manipulate her parents into murder. Her world was small, but online, she could be anyone, and that illusion turned deadly. In Carrollton, Georgia, Sarah Grace allegedly went from mourning daughter to murder suspect, while simultaneously feeding details of the crime to true crime influencers, building a digital mythos around herself before a single arrest was made. Whether calculated or desperate, her online trail became central to the investigation. And in Utica, New York, Bianca Deans was murdered not just in real life, but again and again online, with her death packaged and shared by the man who claimed to love her. What should have been a private act of mourning became public property. Each case tells us something terrifying about the world we've built. A world where grief is performed, where fiction spreads faster than truth, where the lines between victim and villain blur the moment a post goes viral. But these aren't just cautionary tales about tech gone wrong. They're stories about power, who holds it, who abuses it, and who pays the price when fantasy collides with reality. In the hands of the wrong person, a phone isn't just a lifeline, it's a weapon. And in the scrollable chaos of the modern internet, sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones we choose to believe. Because likes are currency, attention is power. And in this era of digital mirrors, some people will do anything to be seen. If this story moved you, or made you think twice about the dark side of our always online world, don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button. We're bringing you more true crime deep dives, real stories, and hard truths about the digital age every single week. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the internet never forgets. Thank you so much for watching. Click on the subscribe button and don't forget to like the video.